right. Well, look, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Really appreciate you coming along. Just briefly, I'm sure I've met most of you before, but I am Blair from Newbook. I'm the Senior Account Manager here. Been with Newbook for 6 years, and my background is fairly heavily in revenue management, hence why I've been picked to host here. Just a couple of little bits of housekeeping before we kick off. If you have any questions, please feel free to just pop them in the chat. We'll leave you guys on mute just so there's not any crosstalk or anything like that, but please feel free to interact in the chat. Just in regards to some of the terminology we'll use today, because we have a fair variety of properties, we'll talk about sites, we'll talk about cabins, we'll talk about hotel rooms, it's all fairly inclusive terminology. It's just a unit that you can sell for a price per night, so it sort of equally applies. So if you see us changing up that terminology, that's not an issue. Also, you'll hear us refer to a revenue management system a lot of times today, or an RMS system. That means revenue management system, not the other software that happens to be called RMS. And finally, we will share all this content post-session, be sent to you. They'll be posted on YouTube. It'll be in the knowledge bases, all that sort of stuff there. And just, I suppose, what you can expect to take away. What we obviously do is we want Matt to teach you a little bit more about Room Price Genie, but also just general information and little tips and tricks about just revenue management in general. Hopefully you can walk away with a few little tidbits from that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Room Price Genie. Matt, if you can just, I suppose, intro yourself a little bit, who you are, what you do, and who is Room Price Genie at a really high level.
Cool. No, thank you so much for having us on. As Blair said, my name's Matt. So I'm the Sales and Revenue Director for Asia Pacific here at Room Price Genie. My background, I came from hotels. I was with Accor Hotels for around 8 years across front office revenue, different parts. Don't hold it against me, then moved to a large OTA as a National Account Manager for New Zealand. And then joined Room Price Genie 2.5 years ago. So we're now a team of 7 of us looking after Asia Pacific in total. So I guess really high level in terms of Room Price Genie, what we are a fully automated pricing tool that integrates seamlessly into Newbook. Basically what we do is we look at your internal sales performance every day for a full year. We look at what's going on in terms of pricing at a local market level, and we use these 2 data sets to formulate an optimized rate, which we will then automatically upload back into Newbook every day for a full year in advance, multiple times a day. So it is very much a fully automated pricing tool, but we do give the end user the ability to override and take control of the system as well. So that's us and me in a nutshell.
Excellent. So obviously to, I suppose, just kick things off and frame up a little bit, and I suppose you might have covered this a little bit already, but just overview how Room Price Genie works, which you've covered that across, I guess, and just a couple of little key features, so what people can expect to frame up from the system.
Yeah, look, I guess the integration we have with Newbook, it is a seamless integration, but the reason for this is that every 2 hours we're actually drawing down your live availability. So in this way, we can see what you as a property have sold and when you've sold that for, and then we're matching that up with the seasonal demand or day of week demand type behavior that we see at a market level. And so it's really these 2 data sets that we're using to say, look, this is where we see opportunity to increase rate or pull back a little bit and get a bit more occupancy. And so in this way, we are fully automating that pricing process to make sure that every day for a year out, your rates are aligned and appropriate based on not just your own internal sales, but also what's going on at a market level. But yeah, that's really what we do and how we integrate in with you guys.
Excellent. So if we just, obviously you've been in the revenue management space or related space for a long time now. So if we get you to take off your Room Price Genie hat for a second, and if you were not working for a revenue management system and you were shopping around for an RMS, what is sort of the 3 key questions you would ask of suppliers to ensure you're getting like the right, because there's different revenue management systems and some are more suitable for other business. What are I suppose the 3 key questions that you would ask to ensure you're going to be partnering with the right one?
100%. There's a lot of different options out there, and I think ultimately you've got to make sure that the tool that you use is right for you. But the three main questions that if I was in a hotel, in a property, at a park, really I'd be saying, look, are you fully integrated into my PMS? And reason for that really is if you're not fully integrated, there could very well be, or there will be gaps in data points. So that's going to incorrectly sway the rate recommendations that the system would generate. It still then also defeats the purpose of looking at full automation or automated tools, because you're still then going to have to do some sort of manual work, either data input or data analysis, to try and figure out what it is that you actually want to do with that information. So number one, are you fully integrated into the PMS? The second is, for me, this is more for my side, is around transparency. So I know that there's a lot of systems out there that will say, look, here's the rate from the box and you should trust it, but it doesn't really give you any tangible knowledge as to what's actually influencing that rate. Is it market? Is it occupancy? Is it a bit of both? And so I really would be looking for a tool that is going to give me that level of transparency, so that if I did want to go influencing the system in any way, I'm fully informed on why the recommendations are the way that they're coming. And then the third is probably making sure that it's also looking at, I've touched on obviously internal and external factors, but being integrated in the system is going to give you that internal data set, but then also what about external market? And there's a lot of systems that are probably rules-based that say, look, when my occupancy reaches X, then this happens to my rate. But if we think about in a low demand period, if you get a group in that's on a rules-based system, your rate's going to be so high, which is not appropriate to market. So I would want to know that as a system, is it also going to look at what's going on in the market? Because I don't want my pricing to be completely skewed by what's just going on internally in my property. So they're probably the main three things. Are you fully integrated? Are you transparent? And are you looking at both internal and external?
Excellent, excellent. So look, a lot of the feedback we get, particularly in the parks industry, people like the idea of dynamic pricing. Everyone likes the idea of making a bit more coin, but people are, I suppose, will people get upset? People have been coming from my park, the same week for 10 years. I don't want to put them off, or things like that. For people who are looking to, I suppose, dip their toes in, sort of, and like the idea of dynamic pricing, but maybe a little bit fearful, what sort of key advice do you have for them?
I come up against this quite a bit, and I think the concept of going from maybe more of a static pricing model into starting to fix rates, it can be scary. It's unknown territory because you don't know what the reaction from the consumer is going to be at the end of the day. What I would say is there is a lot of content online about dynamic pricing, and it's very easy to become overwhelmed, just particularly with the amount of information that's out there. My advice is just to keep it simple. Ultimately, dynamic pricing, in a basic sense, it's about supply and demand. And so on that basis, my advice is don't be afraid to start testing. Where can you increase or where can you decrease? And it might be you start off with small limits, $10 here, $20 there, not a great deal of movement, but just to test the limits and get feedback from guests. And I mean, ultimately, there's other tools out there. I think even the likes of, say, Booking.com or Expedia will give you some sort of metric around guest value. Monitor those scores and just see how your testing is impacting on that guest value proposition. But I think at a real core level, just remember that dynamic pricing is ultimately about flexing your price based on supply and demand, so that you can maximize your revenue in those higher demand periods, and then try and get a little bit more occupancy in those lower demand periods through pulling your pricing down. So just try and not get overwhelmed by the amount of content that is available online, and just remember that testing is the most important thing.
Excellent. So if we're looking at all those sort of things we've mentioned, putting your Room Price Genie hat back on for a moment. So I suppose for your software, what are the key points, particularly when you're looking at parks and things like that? What sets you guys apart? Like why you over another system? What's your point of difference there?
Yeah, so for us, maybe just to sort of give some insight into us as a company, we really have three guiding principles that dictate what we do and how we do things. The first is around transparency, and I touched on that previously. So for us, we actually break out for you for each day, each room, cabin, site, whatever that accommodation inventory type looks like, we break out what's influencing the recommendation. So is it the market that's increased by 15% in price, or is it the fact that my occupancy is behind and maybe I should pull down by 12%? So we fully break out for you so you can understand what's influencing the recommendations. And there's not a lot of tools out there that will give you that level of transparency. So that's number one as a guiding principle for us. Number two is simplicity. And this covers many parts of our business internally. But if I think about it from the end user's perspective, it's really about having a tool where we can automate as much as possible all the processes that come into pricing. A lot of people will go out there and look at, sort of 2, 3, maybe 5 competitors at best and try to understand where they're positioning and see what we do that completely automatically for you. So there's no real hardship there. It becomes a much simpler process. Ultimately, those sort of repetitive tasks should be done probably more accurately and efficiently by technology. You guys have got much better things that you could spend your time doing what you guys do well and looking after your guests and making sure that they're taken care of. So simplicity is the second one. The third is efficiency. So really this talks to, if I think about obviously the autopilot where we will 4 times daily, 12 times, whatever that level of subscription is, but we'll update your pricing multiple times a day. Basically, efficiency in terms of giving maximum output for as little input into the system as possible. So that's really the 3 guiding principles internally that guide all of our actions, both development or other.
So taking that information, generally I suppose the question I get from a lot of clients who are looking into this and seeing who we partner with, they're like, well, what should I expect to get? Like what's the real word? At the end of the day, what bang for buck am I getting? Can you give me like a little, I suppose, a real world story, something where you've gone into a property and made a tangible difference, and what properties should expect when they are bringing on a revenue management system? What sort of outcomes are we looking at?
Yeah, we've got a case study that we did for a property up in the Blue Mountains. And so this one here, I think, really shows the impact you can have if you are a property that already is probably at that state where still you have your static pricing year round, maybe you have a fixed high season, low season. But this particular property up in the Blue Mountains, they were static full year round, and they would change their prices slightly just in the short term. But the hotel manager was responsible for this part, for reservations, for housekeeping, for operations. So many different hats that they were wearing. And she would spend on average around 8 hours a week just trying to understand what she should do with her pricing just in the short term. It was actually one of our business development guys that reached out. And so they jumped on a demo call. And when we took them through them just to say, look, because we're looking at everything so far in advance and flexing pricing, they're not missing that opportunity. So she really quickly realized that, okay, because the system is looking at it much more further in advance than what she was, and also analyzing far more data points as well, she was missing opportunity. So she jumped on board, did the trial. The outcome of that was very immediate. So basically in the 1 month after going live with Room Price Genie for the same month year prior, overall top line revenue increased by 36%.
So obviously that's a great case that everyone would be stoked with, a 36% growth. Do you have sort of an idea about sort of an average that a customer, obviously there's outliers and things along those lines, but do you have an average that you can look at?
Yeah, 100%. Our global average that we see is a 22% increase in top line rooms revenue. So it really largely is to do with the fact that we are constantly monitoring every couple of hours what's been sold at the property, what's going on in the market, adjusting prices, making sure that we're going to achieve the target occupancies that are set. And because we're doing this every day, even 24 hours, that every opportunity that we see is being maximized, and that's where the true value of a system comes into play.
So I suppose given that framing, if we're just talking more generically, revenue management, where people are coming to you maybe from those fully static rates or only just looking seasonal, just RMS system aside from things, what are you, I suppose, the three things you would mention to anyone that are coming to talk to you just on revenue management principles, what's three like really straightforward sort of strategies that you just say, hey, you should be doing this straight away, whether you use Room Price Genie or an RMS system, or you're just doing it yourself. These are three things you should really keep your eye on. What sort of things would you suggest to people, just as far as little quick takeaways?
Yeah. There are definitely some basic things that can be done regardless of RMS system or not. But the first is obviously making sure that as an operator that you're constantly analyzing your pickup and your pace of sales. So what are you selling? When are you selling that for? And looking at that even for 9 months in advance. It's got to be a longer lead approach. You can't just be looking at the next 2, 4, maybe 6 weeks at max. But in doing that, it's going to allow you the opportunity to identify where potentially you could flex your pricing out in longer lead book windows where people are booking. So that's number one. Number two, it's about monitoring your competitor pricing and looking at that also for a 12 months out, particularly in seasonal destinations. So things can change relatively quickly. So it's about understanding where you're price positioned within the market. I think this is probably more of a unique challenge to holiday parks because often there will be a mix of sites and what we call fixed roof accommodation. So whether that's a cabin or a motel unit, maybe dorm beds as an example, you've got different product types. And so not only are you having to monitor potentially then the campsites of your competitors in an area, you're also going to have to look at motels, but you might also have to look at backpackers for your dorm beds as well. So you're running with multiple different data points to try and analyze. And so I think it's important to do that because each of those will have a different sales behavior at different times of the year. Having it as a set and forget that a dorm bed is always going to be, $60 less than a cabin, that rule is not going to serve you so well over the longer term. So just be mindful about the product type you've got at the property. And then I think the third is probably to think about and not be afraid to use length of stay restrictions over high demand periods. And I know holiday parks typically will use this quite well, probably less so in more that motel hotel space, but there's definitely opportunity to use that. And again, that sort of comes back to that testing and trialing just to see what that impact looks like. But within that space as well, being mindful that, for example, if you were to say, look, for a 3-night stay, I'll do a 10% discount, you're going to need to research whether that is actually competitive or not, because it's possible that maybe a 3-night stay average discount in your location for the market is 20%. So you're never going to win in that space. So it's really being mindful about if you're going to do a discount, is it actually going to be attractive to the end consumer to book or not? So they're probably my 3 top tips. As I'm going through and saying this, it's obviously very manual and a lot of hours are going to be spent on doing this. So I think also be true to yourself and say, if I don't have time to do this and do it well, then maybe I should look at technology to try and support in that space.
And just kind of, I suppose, a little bit without notice, but just in having a few discussions in the last week, I suppose I just want to look to dispel a couple of things about quite often the feedback I'll get is revenue management systems sort of, we've tried one before, it only worked for hotels. It wasn't sort of capacity to us. So, and my second is a bit of a two-parter. The other one was, I think as far as people view it, they'll get an instant, that as you said, that first pickup in that first sort of month. But what we see more on holistic businesses have had these things for a couple of years. It's not just that first year pickup, but that's year on year on year on year and year. You just get that return. Can you touch on both of those points for us?
Yeah, I think the thing is also having a tool that accounts for inflation. And a lot of the time, these systems are a set and forget. And so again, if we don't review the settings in the system, then there's never really going to be true growth. So like on our side, as an example, we build in an annual inflation adjustment. And so we will always account and add that on. So even if there is an operator that forgets to review those sort of things, we're already accounting for it. So you don't actually go backwards. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the key things to think about as well.
Excellent, excellent. Now, just as we sort of start to move through, we let Matt sort of, I suppose, I'm just going to bring up a thing here. There's going to be a little QR code that should pop up on screen. Will allow you to access a little bit more information about Room Price Genie. But appreciate all your feedback to those questions there, Matt. But I suppose if you think of people that have come and bothered to spend 20, 30 minutes of their time with us today, what sort of the key things you just want people to, I suppose, take away from today and understand?
One of the big things, and I'll be doing another presentation on this in a few weeks' time, but technology in the accommodation sector, it is changing and it's becoming more accessible to a lot more businesses. So traditionally within the pricing space, there's only really been a couple of key players out there in the market, and it is still relatively early days, but adoption is growing significantly. There was a Skiff report that said in the last 5 years, they approximate around 130,000 properties globally have added some sort of pricing tool as part of their overall tech stack. And so because it is early days, I think the number one thing to consider is that adoption of some sort of pricing technology now will give you a competitive advantage, but going forward into the future, it's going to become a mandatory part of your technology, and to not have one is probably going to be a detriment to you. So that's probably number one to think about, but specifically in that pricing space. I guess obviously making sure that whatever technology that you do adopt, that it does have a good return on investment. And that sort of talks, I guess, to, obviously my background coming from hotels, working in revenue, we didn't really have a lot of those tools back in the day. It was Excels were my life. And I think trying to get people to think about technology not as a cost to business, but an investment. And ultimately, everything should be return on investment positive. As I said, we see an average uplift of 22% top line revenue. You compare that to the cost of the subscription, you're going to come out way better off in terms of revenue. So I think really for the industry, it's just a mindset shift as far as technology, generally speaking, is concerned.
Excellent. I suppose just to sort of, round things up before we might jump into any questions. And I know there's been a question popped in already. We've got a little section where we'll answer them at the end here. But just around your company, Room Price Genie. So given you, if you are the genie, what is, I suppose, the single thing that customers most come to you that want to get out of Room Price Genie? What are they asking for? What's the key thing?
I think anyone that proactively reaches out to find out more about Room Price Genie has already made up their mind that they need some sort of help in the pricing space and is looking to maximize revenue opportunities. So revenue increase, time savings, they're a given. But I think actually the part that they're struggling to find is a tool that is actually simple to use. And a lot of them still require a level of management of the system in terms of guiding and how it works. But for us, because we work on that full automation side, and also thinking back to those 3 guiding principles where simplicity is one of those tools, we have, in terms of an end user base, I've got a client here in New Zealand who's mid-70s, completely tech phobe, absolutely loves it because it's not that hard to get around. And I think that has been often the barrier, is that the tools that have been there haven't been simple to use. So that's probably the biggest thing. And a lot of the feedback we get is about how can we simplify this? How can we make that more seamless and transparent? So we're constantly taking that feedback on board to really, I guess, continue to make sure that we develop a tool that aligns with what our clients are actually asking for.
Excellent. And I suppose just if I can ask you guys now who are participating, if you do have any questions, please just pop them in the chat now. I know, Sandy, you've popped one in. So just from that point of view, Matt, can I still have multiple pricing options, i.e. 7th night free, for guests to be able to see and be able to access? So like running, I suppose, certain promotions in line with the dynamic pricing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully that covers the question there, Sandy. Did I word that well enough?
Yeah, absolutely you can. So it comes down to the setup that you have within the PMS. So more at a technical level, we typically would map to your best available flexi rate. And then underneath that, you would have rates derived. So if you had a 7-night free, you would then have that set up as a rate plan within the PMS that's linked, so that as we change and flex based on that 1-night rate, then so too your others are going to follow. And this is typically how all of our properties have it set up at the moment, whether that's 3, 5, 7, that's up to you guys. It also means that you have control over the discount level that you guys want to load on that as well.
Second question from Louisa. How do you source the competitive set market data? How are you gathering that in?
Good question. So um, I'll try and not make this too technical. We've got two data feeds that we use. One is a tool internally that we use to look at predominantly OTA data to measure pricing movements. So I always like to be very clear that we are not a rate shop tool. So we are not saying motel room of yours is 200 and competitor 1, 2, and 3 have the price of X, Y, and Z. And on that basis, we make a recommendation. That's not how we work. What we are using our tool to measure OTA data is if we say, for example, if we're in the Gold Coast, let's say we look at Langham and we see prices go from 500 to 550. We don't actually care about what they've charged. What we've measured was the 10% pricing increase. So then just in the same way, if we see Meriton go from 200 to 220, it's also only a 10% pricing increase. So for us, we're more measuring the movements. And the whole idea is that we want to make sure that your pricing is in line with those overall market fluctuations. If we were a rate shop tool and we had a rule that said, I always want to sit $5 under the competitor 1, in low times, it can just become a race to the bottom. And that's obviously not what we're about. So that's data set number 1. Data set number 2 is a feed through AirDNA. They're obviously independent from Airbnb, but they're reporting specifically on Airbnb product. And so what we're doing when we consider these two data sets is to say, look, based on your specific locality and your local market, the accommodation sector on average has seen a movement of X percentage. And we will then use that to move you in line with those market fluctuations.
Hopefully that covers across the question there, Louisa. This might be as a how long is a piece of string, and maybe you'll need to take this one offline with Stephen, but said, look, he wants a rough idea of the cost of subscription for a holiday park. Now I know that I have parks that are 20 sites and our largest one is 8,700 sites. So that's a pretty different question, but I'll leave that for you. I'm not sure if you can give someone a ballpark idea of it's
I
each
can.
individual.
I can. So in line with our 3 guiding principles, one of those transparency, our pricing is fully transparent. So it's on our website. On the website, there is a pricing page where you can input the total inventory of your property, and that will give you what the subscriptions options are, either on flexible monthly or on annual across each of our different plan types. The way that you would work that is that if you are a holiday park, anything that's a fixed roof, that includes glamping, that's billed on a ratio of 1:1. So 1 room, charge of 1 room. When it comes to sites, it's billed on a ratio of 4:1. So if you've got 100 sites, take that as 25 rooms when you put that into the sheet. But if there is any specific questions or can't seem to clarify, figure that out, anyone's welcome to reach out to me anytime.
Awesome. Question from Janice. Can we set minimum pricing for peak periods where you want to have a floor limit?
Yeah, so when we set up your account, we actually ask you to provide for each of your different accommodation types, what is your minimum and maximum price parameters that you want us to load. This is then part of the control that we give back to you guys, because we set these up as a year-round default settings. But then you might say, look, from the 26th of December till the 6th of Jan being my true peak times, here's a new set of rules. And so you guys can go in and override and put in a higher minimum and a higher maximum to really yield up on that pricing over that time. But then obviously year round, our recommendations are still formulated within the parameters that you're happy with.
So it looks like that's all the questions we've got for now. Now, if you've got some specific questions that you sort of are not as comfortable in the public forum asking, or maybe more detailed or specific, please, if you've used the QR code before, Matt, feel free to reach out to him. If you want to contact us here at Newbook and we can answer things or put you in touch with Matt, certainly feel free to. Post this. Oh, another one from Sandy. Will I get enough value from Room Price Genie if I only have direct bookings on my website? I don't use OTAs at all.
Yeah, you will, because ultimately, if you're not on OTAs and only on your direct website, because we're plugging into and amending prices inside Newbook, they're obviously going to flow out to your own booking engine. And so there you still then have the opportunity to capitalize on those opportunities that we see to either increase pricing or pull back if we need a bit more of an occupancy approach. So
I think from that point of view, Sandy, we also see a number of properties, like whilst they're not on OTAs and a lot of properties run at a high enough occupancy, like I don't ever need that and I don't ever want that for a myriad of reasons. The fact is your competitive set is on there, so it's still worth them garnering data from there so they can see that movement in the market, even if you're not participating in that. A lot of your competitors would be. Question from Andrew. Matt, I have 100% occupancy for my April school holidays. Now my reservations for May are less than 1%. Over the month ahead, people will book for a weekend, but we're extremely variable, like season, school holidays, long weekend. How would Genie work with that sort of massive fluctuation in situations? I suppose the other thing we see quite often in the industry is I could fill my park 20 times over on Friday and Saturday night, but Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday it's a ghost town. So how does it view that?
This is definitely a how long is a piece of string type question, because there are multiple factors that go into play. So obviously what's going on in terms of market level pricing, that's going to be sitting independent from what you're seeing in terms of your own sales performance as well. There are other settings that you as an operator can tweak in there to have the system behave in a particular way also. I guess the key thing really to remember is that even in a low demand period, there might still be 1 or 2 days here or there where there might be an opportunity to increase. And granted, it might only be $3 or $4, but that might have been $3 or $4 that you wouldn't have got otherwise. So it's really, there's a lot of it depends in that particular question. We have plenty of places that are in highly seasonal destinations and still are able to see some sort of uplift.
I think as well, sometimes when we're talking about dynamic pricing in the marketing, people think like Uber, it's surge pricing only. It also can mean discounting, and it's the matter of trying to find that balance for at what price will I get the most amount of rooms, which will result in the most revenue. It is finding that balance in both up and down directions. So certainly don't always think, and I think a lot of people do think of dynamic pricing as surge pricing, where it's only just going to go up. There is that flexibility for it to go both directions. So
there's probably one other thing, if I can just sort of chime in. The way that I try to explain to a lot of people, Andrew, is that pricing in itself will only capture what demand exists. And so when we see properties that adopt Room Price Genie, their behavior goes from being something that is reactive to pricing to more proactive. And so if through Room Price Genie, we have a chart view, but they can identify, 6 months out that we're already selling on the minimum lowest rate that you've allowed us to. Obviously market is quiet, your occupancy is dead. And so that then allows you to identify exactly the dates, and you can say, right, what am I going to do now to try and drive demand or create awareness about what I have to offer at the property? So rather than the knee-jerk reaction to just simply drop pricing down, what are you doing to try and drive demand and then use pricing to capture that? So there's other elements that come into it as well.
Question from Amy. They actually do a pricing per person per night rather than per site. Can dynamic pricing work with that pricing structure, or is it only a site or / room per night?
We can work on a per person, because we also work with backpackers where 1 bed, 1 dorm bed, 1 person. So it really comes down to the integration in terms of how we connect, and then how you have that reference in terms of base pricing within your PMS. So yes, it can.
And from Louisa, how does Room Price Genie deal with market segmentation, or does it at all for different market segments?
The way that I talk about this is really that we're there to optimize the best available one night rate, which go back into Newbook and then send that out to obviously your different sales channels. Specifically when it comes to segmentation, I think this is obviously going to be a very broad assumption, Louisa, but if you've got your groups, because we're putting out essentially a public price, you can then make a calculated decision about where maybe you want your group rate to sit for that particular inquiry. With your corporates, likely you have these set at corporate static rates potentially. And so all that happens on our side is we see that as another room sold, and we'll re-optimize pricing on that basis. The whole idea is that people that are booking on those online channels, they're likely to be non-regular, potentially non-loyal, non-return. And so on that basis, what we're seeking to do is making sure that they pay a fair market price based on that market level pricing behavior, as well as your own internal sales performance. Those that are regular, loyal, return, contracted, they will always come to you directly, and you can enter that in at the agreed rate directly into the PMS.
There we go. I think that's all the questions from now, and we've sort of run 5 minutes over. So thanks everyone for staying with us. I think it's a miracle when one of my meetings only runs 5 minutes over for those who are used to speaking to me. So appreciate you guys all hanging around. Again, this will all be made available to you in recordings and little info packs and things like that. But if you do have any questions or queries or more in-depth one, I would encourage you guys to absolutely reach out. But Matt, thank you very much for joining us today and giving us a bit of insight.
Thanks for
And
having me.
yeah, appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you.
Cheers.